It is the Council Subcommittee on Water Issues, and today we have our regular meeting. And if we would call roll, please.
Chairman Blair.
Here.
Member Good.
Here.
Member Sischka.
Here.
Okay. And discussion and action items. Public can comment on anything that we have going on here. Feel free to get one of the cards in the back and get it up here to the front, and we'll give you your time to discuss whatever it is you would like to discuss on the agenda. Okay, has everybody seen the minutes?
Yep. And I move we accept.
Second.
Okay, the minutes have been motioned for a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Item B is infrastructure topic, pumping versus recharge. Is that you, Leslie?
That would be me, sir.
You look lovely
How's
without a
everybody
mask
doing?
on, may I add.
Well, I always took one off when you asked me to, so hope I haven't changed
Maybe
too
it's
much.
just I couldn't see.
That's nice
I
to see
couldn't
your smiling
clearly.
face,
I
Leslie.
couldn't see clearly through the plexiglass.
Yeah.
Oh, it probably took some years off, actually. I wanted to check with Jennifer. Are we putting the agenda up for folks, or or should I be putting that up?
Yes, if you want to open, do
Leslie,
you have it in your drive?
Can you either raise your voice or get closer
Talk into
to
the
mic or
microphone?
something?
Yeah. Let's see if we can get it off the website.
Having all this space.
Okay, is that visual from
I feel like you're like.
your side there, Jennifer? I can see it.
No, I
No?
don't see it, so it should be
Do
up
I do
here.
a share or do you do a share? Share screen.
Share, yes.
When we move into our new clubhouse, maybe we'll have better equipment.
I don't have a share option on mine. Do you? I can invite people. I can stop video.
Yeah, I don't want to share my screen. Let me come over there. All right, is it this?
So when did you go up there?
Leslie?
Did you go up Thursday?
Is it this?
Came back Sunday?
No, came back yesterday.
And
That was a mistake.
It's either a
Because
date.
every toy hauler that went up,
There he is, the man, the wizard. The wizard's here.
everybody who went up on Friday, we followed the same people back on Monday.
Well, when we went down with Butch Tracy and I went with Jack Miller from Chew Valley to Mexico, we
you show me what you
intentionally
mean,
stayed a
please?
day longer,
Hmm?
thinking we're gonna.
like if you just do this.
Back in.
Yeah.
Everybody's thinking the same way we were thinking.
Yeah.
2 hours to get
Yeah,
it.
you don't have to
No.
share. You have to share the screen.
3 hours.
so should I stop sharing?
I said it's not even Memorial Day weekend. I think everybody just is feeling unleashed with this mask stuff.
Everybody's going crazy now. Oh my gosh.
Probably the same way this weekend. I'm gonna go up to Lake Mead and go striper fishing. They have a striperama.
Is there any water in me?
I haven't been up there in a while. Maybe it'll be easy to catch them because they're so little.
That's exactly right. Hey, you'll be able to reach in.
We start fishing at 8 o'clock Saturday night, and then turn our fishing at 8 o'clock Sunday morning. I think that's just it.
Okay, looks like we have the agenda up. Everybody,
Okay. Hi, Leslie.
Here we
How
go.
are you?
I am well. How are you all?
Good.
doing
I'm
today?
wonderful. Still
No.
wonderful.
Now we're ready.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so standing item. I'm going to mention that with this item last time, you had asked about permanent recharge. And so our order's a little bit flipped. So don't think that we didn't consider that. For those here in the public, that presentation is going to follow. And then we can have some discussion on potentially what we can add to this memo that is a recurring item. So as it being a recurring item, I think you understand the basics of it. You're wanting to know what's being pumped versus what's being recharged. And this is what's delivered to the recharge facility. We've been working with this chart quite a bit, and it looks like it's changed again on you a little bit. So to follow the graphic, the line is now your pumping again, just because we can only stack so many things. The gray is always your previous year, and the items in color are your current year. So we're going to look at April, and why we lag a little bit is that timing of this meeting and the final collection of data doesn't allow us to be right at May to have a production of a memo and the supporting data. So we'll just keep watching what's going on here. That type is a little small for me, so I'm going to have to look at my paper here. So if we look first just at the pumping, since that's our leading line for the most part, 666.191 to be exact, acre feet were pumped this calendar year, this month, I guess I should say. And you can see the comparison to last year, so we're climbing a little bit. When we look at the effluent delivery for April, that was 109 acre feet. And last year was 214. And surface water deliveries were 93 this month. And last year, surface water deliveries were 822 acre feet. So this shows you a few key things that we've pointed out before, is that effluent is fairly constant, but it depends on what our direct users need. So our direct users include the golf courses and an industrial facility. When they're calling for more water, so when times are drier even than usual. So this is no surprise. We live in a desert. We've been under dry conditions for quite a while. We continue to be under dry conditions. Those needs are going to be met with more direct delivery needed and less available to put towards the recharge facility. This is the reclaimed water. Surface water, I think, is pretty clear as well. That relies on precipitation patterns, and those reservoirs just don't fill up magically on their own to the same level every year. We've watched this as a former water resource manager, watching these things and looking out for the city as to where things were going. I watched that quite a bit, and we had to kind of game it a little bit, like, well, what do we think is going to happen? What have our trends been looking like? How do we make sure that we don't run those things too far, too low? But then the reality is we can't guess the future either. We can't guess that we won't get a snowpack and a snowpack, or a snowpack, a really good snowpack, and then a rain, and then maybe a little bit more snow. So this is a year that we didn't have the opportunity to start recharge early on the surface water side. And so that's what you're starting to see reflecting in the chart. So as of April, the surface water recharge window opens, and it'll be open until November.
Leslie, I calculated those numbers year to date. So our effluent deliveries are down 28.9% over 2020. Our surface water deliveries are down 90.9% over 2020. And our water pumped is up 15.4% over 2020 year to date. So at least we have now 4 months of comparable data. And I think we can start looking at where our comparisons are to the previous year to at least be able to start to see some trends. And if there's any conclusions or actions that need to be taken to compensate for either over pumping or under delivery of recharge, then at least we have some numbers now that we can start feeling somewhat reliable for.
Correct. And I think behind the scenes, it's important to know that these have been tracked for years. So that's what I would rely on when I was thinking, okay, let's have some discussions with the operations staff and figure out, what are we looking at for this coming year? What have we seen as our frequency for when we might be running into another drier than normal spell? And how do we keep maybe those lakes up a little bit more? Or maybe, the decision of councils is to move as much water as you can. I mean, there's been a variety. So yes, you can see, just the difference between 2 years. But we also have records that date back, and we can run these trend lines and see what's happening. So it was actually probably a year or two ago that I was just like, oh, we're going to hit another of the rough patch because I've seen it in the data before. So here we are. Now we have it. It showed up a little bit later than expected, but now we wait to see what production looks like at end of June when we have what should be our typical monsoon season. If we don't have those monsoons like we didn't have last year, then we'll see what this graph looks like. But thank you for running the numbers. And
based upon some of the data, though, that we have here, it reflects in a big way the fact that we have. Hello.
That wasn't me.
And people are using water to try to keep their plants and stuff alive, so they're dumping more water. I know I am. On my juniper trees, there's several reasons why. You can listen to different people say why, the trees are dying, and it could be with the drought, and it could be a mixture of not having a cold enough winter to kill the beetles, and a mixture of the two.
mm-hmm.
So I know that, particularly at our house, I know that we are using a soaker hose on our junipers a lot, so that's why I see this number pumping more this month because of the lack of rain. Would that be a fair statement?
That's always a mixture of things, but that's definitely there. We were watching the news articles a couple months ago, and I mentioned, if we're going into another bark beetle season, we've seen this before. We know how our community reacts. We know how other stakeholders in the area guide people, to use more water to try to protect the trees. So once again, we've seen that before, and that's part of, I think, the city's outreach is that we need to be partnering with those Forest Service, the cooperative extension, all those who talk about these kind of phenomenon that seem to happen, and we've seen them before. So yes, I'm sure that the water use is definitely driven by dryer, definitely driven by people trying to rescue trees, and then it's also a decision of how I'll move over here how much is needed and when. Once you have a pocket of trees, I can see them from where I live. There's a pocket that's brown as can be. There's no water that's going to save that clump of trees. So
they call one another. I know they do because I've been told that. It's like
the trees.
Well,
or the beetles.
There's a very specific not the trees.
Or the neighbors.
there's a very specific house in town, and I won't say where it's at, but they irrigate their ponderosas all the time, and there's 6 of their ponderosas that are all in one big circle that are all dead. And I've been told that they emit this high pitch on the trees that they're taking out, and all of them gather. I don't know if they're having a party or what they're doing, but they're running things.
I think that's the outreach too of how to water these kind of trees properly. Sometimes people are just irrigating them all the time, but they're really a deep soak kind of tree. And so if you're just kind of watering that upper, soil level, it's not going to necessarily do it. So here again, that's outreach, and we've had materials here at the city in the past too that we've been able to show, do it at the canopy distance, the diameter, those kind of things. And when we have new people in the area, we need to have those kind of things available. And we have plenty of partners. I mean, Cooperative Extension, Highland Center, you name them. They also have, probably far more expertise than we have on our bench here.
Leslie, I have a question. I've been asking for levels in our wells,
mm-hmm.
which for me is really the bottom line. It's what is happening in our wells, seeing the drought, seeing everything that's going on. What do you see in the wells?
Well, when we last spoke about that, we were trying to figure out what was the frequency of bringing that back to this group. And I think we decided on every 6 months. So it might actually be next month that we're preparing to provide you something here. Overall, I would say we saw the trends from last time. We could see what was happening. I don't think that just say this calendar year so far, bringing you that data would necessarily give you what you're looking for. Those are really long-term records that we have to look at. So we looked at those long-term records. I think it was February. Correct me if I'm wrong. It could have been March. And then we were going to continue loading new information for you. So I guess to answer your question is that, in this active management area, water levels are measured by the state. They track those in a database. We've brought those in for you. We can see that there's trends that really depend on the well. If it's a production well, under pumping conditions, of course, it looks like that. It has drawdown conditions. If everything comes back up, this is what we do in science, is we turn things off, we get a static water level, and we were still seeing trends that in areas we're dipping down, and then others, wells that were near our recharge facilities that were kind of hanging steady or going up a little bit. So we don't have a homogeneous aquifer to work with here. So let's see, I'll have to check the notes. I thought you were due in July for another round of water level data.
I guess
and a
I thought that
discussion.
we were going to do it once a quarter rather than twice a year. So
Let me check my notes.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I probably would have queued it up this time if it was, on my
I think we
my
should.
flag. So let me put a note, and if we'd like to see it in July, we can do that.
yeah, if we can do it more frequently, I'd certainly like
Quarterly?
that. Sounds like Councilman Good would like the same, and I'm sure Blair would like the same. So, let's try and get as much information on that as possible. I think it's a great time to be doing that because, I come from a ranching family, or my wife's family was a ranching family out in Big Chino, and they were seeing, even in drought years, water coming in from other areas to supplement what they had pulled out of the ground, even in drought years. So I'd like to find out, and I think it's important that the committee understands what's happening in the ground as much as possible.
Okay. And we need to remember what bounds we were looking at. So are we looking at just the city's wells, or are we trying to get
Just the city's wells.
just the city's wells?
Yeah, just the city's wells.
Well, and I think too, I'd like to have some correlation between, now that we're pumping, from the information I've received, 1/3 of our water we're pulling back from the airport rather than from the Chino fields. How is that affecting our level in the Chino fields opposed to if we were pulling it all out of there? I mean, is there a way we can tie a number to that? I know it's probably pretty difficult.
We can show you in spreadsheets.
Yeah, I know, because,
what
when you
those-
start talking about 1/3 of the water that we're pumping is coming out of where our wastewater plant is, with the 3 wells we have out there, it's got to make a difference in the Chino aquifer.
Depending on how much competition is out there.
Well, yeah.
So if we've dropped our pumping at the city and moved some over to the airport area, but Chino's starting to grow more, or private water companies are pulling more, then sometimes the gains you might think you've had, you don't necessarily have. You've just reduced how much you're taking out of there. So maybe we'll try to make it a short PowerPoint. It might be similar to what you'll see on the permanent recharge today. I'll try to make something short. But I think you need to understand a cross-section of your geology here a little bit. I know we've been through this a little bit, but the aquifer material is very thin in the airport area. There's not a whole lot to work with in some cases as compared to out in Chino. So, and just the gradient, everything's moving off the foothills. That's why we don't have our production wells in city limits inside, around the downtown area anymore. We did a history lesson quite a while ago, if you remember, that, they had to keep moving where the city acquired its water supplies until they said, oh, it makes sense. There's much more aquifer material and water and storage available out in the Chino area. So let's see if I can package something that makes sense, that has all the pieces I think that you're looking for. Is what are our production levels looking like? Well, when it's a production, I know we've done that. We want to try to look at static water levels as much as we can, with minimal impacts from others that might be pumping nearby, including one of our wells pumping near one of our own wells, and the difference between airport and Chino field, and then also just kind of having a quick check of a reality of our geology.
Leslie, and again, do you know is there an estimate on how deep the aquifer is in the Little Chino?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I should know, being that I have a geology background and a hydrology background. We look at how deep the wells have been sunk, and they're into the volcanics. So we know we have an upper alluvial and then a lower volcanic, and that's where the production is typically from. But our wells are also old, where they're not cased specifically in the volcanics. So we know that we can capture or have cascading water from the upper alluvial unit. So how about if I wrap that into the presentation next time, that we look at aquifer depths where we hit basement, where that's not productive. Things of that nature, and it's going to undulate. You'd be undulating. It's not going to be once again homogeneous across.
That's exactly right. I just remember that back in the 50s, which were drought years too, my father-in-law out in Big Chino would sink a well and be a dry well, and 100 yards away it would just go crazy with volume of water. So I was wondering if we could kind of paint a picture for people, just, a basic picture here in water issues real quickly at some point, as to, what an aquifer actually looks like. It's not a big swimming pool. And, I would imagine there's cracks and crevices and small pools and large pools and things like that, some with more pressure than others to, let's say, rise to the surface. So, if we could do that here in this meeting at some point, that would be great.
We have cross sections we can bring so we can look at these things. Okay, I appreciate the feedback, and we can prepare something. Once again, it'll probably be fashioned similar to what you'll see next with the permanent recharge, and if that seems to hit the level of interest in what you would like to know, great. If we need to expand, then we can expand as well on these kind of PowerPoints.
I had a question. Only because I'm like Steve, I'm dangerous with what I know, and I do know out in Paulden there didn't used to be anything other than a sand and gravel operating business, as well as ranches from I-40 all the way to 89. Pumping nonstop, irrigation on all their fields, and everything was irrigated. Now you have a bunch of individual family homes out there. Through the state of Arizona, can an individual family home use a well that they can use on growing farm fresh foods that you see at the farmer's market? Is there a cap on how many gallons one of those can pump?
If you're speaking of the Paulden area, they're outside of the active management area, so they don't have regulation. They have to file for a notice of intent to drill, but they don't have reporting requirements out there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the huge problems we miss at the state level. I mean, you got a huge aquifer out there, and there's people drilling wells. They don't have recharge wells, and you can go out there and you can see acres and acres of farm fresh stuff at the farmer's market. And one side of the mouth, you're saying, man, I'm eating fresh food. And on the other side of my mouth, I'm saying I'm draining the aquifer to get it too. So, I mean,
it's water to eat.
I get it, but I just wish that the state would do more to control those wells and what they're doing today. And that's just my own complaint, because we're required by the state to do what we have to do in our active management area to be responsible. But yet individual homeowners, regardless of how much land they have, they don't have any responsibility to anything. So, okay, I'm done complaining.
Okay. We had a good, healthy discussion there. I think the final pieces on this memo you've seen before. So the total pumped 1,987 and change. Total that was delivered to the recharge was 1,132. And then you can see the breakdown of how much of the reclaimed has gone versus the surface water. And then you'd ask for a percent of water pumped, and we're at a 61% water pump versus recharge delivery. Footnotes, of course, we talk about how note number 3, which is very tiny up there, the city holds a non-recoverable long-term storage account for permanent recharge volumes. And that's where we'll be going next if you'd like to move to the next item.
Okay. Steve, did you have a question? No. And I want to thank you and whoever else has worked on this. Leslie, it's very informative and very clear to understand, and thank you.
Well, let's thank the operations staff because they're the 24/7 people who collect this data so that we can look at it. Okay, I'm going to need to move to a PowerPoint, and hopefully...
Are we going to item C now? The focus topic, or this still?
Yes, sir. Yep, if you're ready to move.
Okay. We're going to item C, focus topic, permanent recharge.
Okay, and now I'm stuck again because I can see the PowerPoint here, but not projecting. Is this where I share? No, don't share. Bullet to the top. Oh, look at that.
Beautiful.
You can teach an old dog new tricks. Uh-oh.
Dog just dropped his bone.
Yeah, dog dropped the bone. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So this topic did stem from your previous memo where you wanted to have a better understanding of what permanent recharge means for this community, for the city, and how they've gone about this. So on your memo, I did mention that we have ADWR permits related to this activity, and I listed the 3 that were related to this topic. We have other permits related to the recovery of water, but right now we're just talking about putting it down, not taking it back out. So for a timeline, in 1988, the city was issued its first document from the state for a recharge project. That location is still where it is cited today. In 1994, the legislature enacted the Underground Water Storage and Savings and Replenishment Act, which further defined the recharge program, and that's what led to these permit numbers that we have today. So we did have our permits reissued under that act. And then the city wasn't at that time putting water to their permanent recharge permit account, I guess, so to speak. And that had me a little boggled. I wasn't quite sure what was happening, and looking through the history, at some point it really didn't matter because in 2004, a citizens initiative came along, which was Prop 400. It was placed on the ballot and it was gained approval. It said any increase in the corporate limits of the city of Prescott by annexation that equals or exceeds 250 acres shall include a requirement of all effluent generated by the new development in the annexed area to be used for permanent recharge. And so that's where reporting practices needed to, procedures and reporting practices needed to come in line with that because it was ultimately city charter language. So moving along, I did this outline already for you on your agenda memo. When we started having conditions for permanent recharge tracking and reporting was in 2016. So this PowerPoint is going to look at the permanent recharge practices relating to the physical, our accounting practices, and how we report back to the state. So, wow, this is crazy. Okay, so what is recharge? On the left-hand side, it's a block diagram showing you can have natural recharge. And natural recharge can take some different looks. It can be mountain block recharge, and that would be up in our Bradshaw Mountains where there's fractures and things like that. The water makes it down into the mountain block and then keeps moving based on gravity. You can have it in more of the plains area, the flats, where you have a creek and you're getting natural recharge from the creek based on precipitation conditions. On the right-hand side is where you do a artificial recharge project where you make basins and you pond that water and you encourage it to go down into the ground. And your goal is to site these things as best you can so that it will do that. And whether it was good consultants, good inside thought processes, local geology experts, or sheer luck, the city sited their recharge facility in a very good location. It's right next to Granite Creek. The downside could be is that the state was concerned about, would that water daylight? Would you be sending it down just to have it pop up in the creek? And then you're not really recharging water. It's coming back out, and you might not necessarily get credit for that. So this is what we're looking at today. Specifically, is the city has recharge basins or cells. They put water down from both the reclaimed system and surface water. But we need to start separating these things out a little bit as we go. So then what is permanent recharge? It just means that you're not pulling it back out. You don't have a well that you're taking it back out of. So if you're going to call it permanent recharge, we have to put it into a different account. We have to say that water stays in the ground. So why do you do this? So this underground water storage, savings, and replenishment, or easily called recharge, is a means for storing excess water supplies so they may be used in the future. Artificial recharge is an increasingly important tool in the management of Arizona's water supplies, particularly in meeting the goals of the 1980 Groundwater Management Code. Storing water underground to ensure an adequate supply for the purposes of satisfying current and future needs is both practical and cost-effective in Arizona's desert environments. So this is a direct quote from the Department of Water Resources webpage, where they are the regulators on this type of activity. And of course, it's been highly encouraged in this area for decades as a way to hopefully get closer to safe yield, to be able to build more, to have more growth as a means of saving water into an account. However, I'll back us up again. This is permanent, so this is not going to go into an account that can be used for new growth. It has to be permanent recharge.
I understand that. But when you start talking, I know we're talking about the city of Prescott, but my aggravation then becomes we're putting all of this Proposition 400 water into permanent recharge, where it is allowed to be used by anybody and everybody that wants to get a well from Arizona Department of Water Resources, who claims this is the greatest and best thing that we can do for our environment, with no controls on the other side. How ludicrous can that possibly be? Where you're not doing anything to control, and I hate that word, but you're not doing anything to offset what we're being mandated to do, and they're not in the same given area where we're pulling our water from.
Well, it wasn't.
I'm done complaining.
Yeah, it is tricky, and there's realities that come into play with these things. So, from the state's point of view, they didn't force the city. You can choose to have a non-recoverable permit. You have to ask for it. Right. So the city at one point chose that and asked for it. And then the citizens in 2004 wanted that put into effect. And this opens up another whole bag of history, and that's related to the Big Chino, which we probably won't be able to go there today. But the thought process was that water would be coming in, and they wanted to see that some of that water permanently recharged. So
again, for somebody else to use it uncontrolled. I know it's all paper and it's all shuffled, but when you look at wet is wet and wet is not wet, they're taking water we're putting back in, using it for their own benefit without having any opportunity to do anything with it. So,
deep breath.
Okay.
So, non-recoverable water. This is how it's written in statute. Designation of non-recoverable water. It says at the request of the applicant, the city, the director may designate a water storage permit as storing non-recoverable water. If the water storage occurs within an active management area, the water storage permit may be designated in this manner only if the storage is consistent with the active management area's augmentation program. Further, it says water stored pursuant to a water storage permit that has been designated as storing non-recoverable water may not be recovered on an annual basis, may not be credited to a long-term storage account, and may not be used for replenishment purposes. So it's really those first two that the city works at this point. So that was the shift that happened with this, is when we had in 2016 the first annexed area of 250 acres that started to build then the city had to act by making sure there was metering in place or a proxy method for determining how much water then staff had to be able to shuffle off into a certain area of their annual reporting and have it not go into the long-term storage account anymore. Okay, so this is a little bit getting into the physical part. So this is your recharge facility out there. These are each basins or cells here. These two generally take the surface water. So we're going to keep pushing that kind of off to the side right now because permanent surface water can't be permanently recharged. And then these other cells have been taking the effluent supplies. And it's great that they separated out those basins because it would be very hard. It's already a little challenging to do the reporting, but if the waters were mixed, it would make it very difficult. So I do appreciate the operations staff for keeping the supply types separate as much as they can, unless we're having, in a situation where it just has to go somewhere, then we can work through that. So how do the supplies get to the facility? So we're going to look at Sundog here. It's transported up to the recharge facility, which is located here. The airport wastewater treatment plant also has a feed into that facility you just saw, the aerial view. And Watson and Willow also have a feed to that facility. And once again, no surface water. So we're going to hammer that one home because that gets confusing sometimes. So surface water supplies and permanent recharge is a no. The statute says if water is stored pursuant to a water storage permit and its use is based on a decreed or appropriative water right, the approximate recoverable amount of water stored in a month shall be recovered on or before the last day of the following month or within the same calendar year, whichever is earlier. So that's how the city operates. Having it down to the month, it would be far more challenging than we have capabilities to do at this time, and the city has been doing this for well over a decade of balancing out what went in and what came back out and reporting successfully to the department each year. So no permanent recharge related to surface water. We can't do it. But effluent supplies and permanent recharge is a yes. And so this just goes over, again, that we are making sure that we're accounting for the properties that meet this city charter. We are accounting for where we need to report that within the state reporting system. And this, once again, is permanent recharge, solely our effluent or reclaimed supplies, however you like to term them. So the accounting. When annexed areas meet the requirement in the city's charter and begin to development, placement of a return flow meter is necessary. So we have to have metering out there to know what's coming back from those 250 acre or more areas. Metered data collection can commence once that meter is in place. The metered data is subsequently available for review and incorporation into the annual water withdrawal and use report. So we don't have a full number until the end of each calendar year. We have things tracking along and we're watching them to see how they're doing, but a full number is not available till the end of the year. And if we do have it, I've always considered it provisional. Meters can have challenges, so you have to watch mechanical, things. So let's look at just 2020. So we have two areas that currently have this type of metering, and one is the Granite Dells Estates. They started in 2016. In 2020, 30.4 acre feet was accounted as permanent recharge. In the Deep Well Ranch, so DWR there stands for Deep Well Ranch, it takes 2 meters to capture what's happening out of that area right now, and they have 7.9 acre feet that was attributed to permanent recharge with a total of 38.3. When we look at the time frame from 2016 to 2020, 116 acre feet have been permanently recharged. So we're on the books, both in-house and at the state, for that much recharge, and it's shuttled off to a certain permit number, a tracking system, so that we know.
So that was for the entire year of 2020.
Yes, sir.
And how many homes were contributing to that 30.4 in Granite Dells Estates?
That's a good question. I don't have that in front of me. I apologize. Can I get that number for you later and email it to you?
Right.
Yep, will do.
Deep Well Ranch, the same question.
Got it.
So Leslie, just, let me do an aside here. I've been asking Craig for, what is the percentage out of these new developments? What is the percentage that we're actually getting back? And when he talked to me the other day, it was, well, we've got, we're not sure about what the meter's telling us, because it's telling us that we're actually sending back to the recharge facility more than we're sending to the development in the first place. So
It's kind of hard to believe, huh?
yeah, that's somewhat hard to believe, but I think that's definitely something that we need to really be keeping an eye on, and we need to have a report as often as possible about, once you're confident in those meters, what percentage we're actually getting back from those Prop 400 developments.
Yeah, and I think I would trust your public works director, and if he gave you a certain percentage of what he believes is happening, then I think that would be the one you'd want to use. I think what you're bringing up is what I alluded to a little bit earlier, is that mechanical devices fail.
Yes.
And so you have to know what you're going to do about that. And so back in 2016, Craig and I sat down and we worked through an equation to get at a reasonable number in case we had meter failure. And so that is in place, and that has been used in certain years to take care of things. And then when we've seen that calls back then to the operations and says, we need to have heightened monitoring of these meters. If they drift on us, we have to know sooner versus later. So we would like a full-fledged, metering situation that we know we can rely on, but we're still fairly, even though it's, 2021 at this point, and 2016 is when things kind of started up, there's some work in time to these kind of things. So we prepared. So as I mentioned, Craig and I sat down in 2016 and said, what do we do if these meters fail? And so we've been able to have a backup plan for the city to report as closely as we can.
So is that kind of like the calculation? I look on my water bill, and every once in a while I'll see that that water sent to the house, there's more water sent back into the sewer system as far as a number is concerned than what we actually had delivered to the house.
I would ask Mark, but it's also the rotation of when they're taking.
So is that part of this
reading.
calculation you're talking about?
No, those things are held separately. So this is entirely on its own. It's not going to be showing up in the city's utility billing database. We do take pieces of that when we need it to support a meter, but it's not where we house the work we do here.
Okay.
What is that number percentage that you came up with then?
I'm not quite sure what Craig has given you most recently, so I don't have a number for you today.
Be interesting to hear that.
Yeah. So I think in our next PowerPoint, you might see a little bit more as we look at demand estimates and what we think. We might get into return flows a little bit. I'm not certain. Don't recall at the moment. So I understand what you're saying. Let's see if we can tighten things up. Ultimately, we're looking at, is there something that we're going to add to your pumping versus recharge standing memo related to permanent recharge? And so we'll kind of wrap back around to that at the end here. And we're pretty much at the end now, but we'll go over this a little bit. Okay, so this is the Deep Well Ranch area. So when we were having metering challenges, or even if we don't have metering challenges, we need to know which areas, and this I think goes to member Good's comment, is how many houses are attributing to each one of these areas. And so that was one of the steps we took this year, because it doesn't always work. It seems very straightforward and easy. Just put a meter in. It'll capture everything, right? But, things are based on gravity flow. There's a lot more to it. So you have to know your engineering, and you have to be talking about these kind of things. So we came to this point this year where I said, numbers aren't looking quite right. So, let's look at this a little bit more. Can you tell me how the infrastructure was set up? So this is Deep Well Ranch Antelope Crossing, that's now known as Saddlewood. This is also the Saddlewood area. The highway's right here. This is that curve that they'd been working on over here. And across the road would be Westwood. So what this diagram is saying is that part of Antelope Crossing is going to what the city has called the Antelope Crossing flow meter, return flow meter here. But this is also Antelope Crossing, and this area is gravity fed to the plant and goes through a different meter. So we watch both of those. And then as we see Westwood kick on, up here, they're, in motion now, then we're going to see that development of deep well also combining with and going to what we call the Ruger flow meter. And I'm sure there'll be other things maybe on this side that start adding to the deep well flow meter. So I thought this was a valuable diagram because a lot of people are just like, yeah, just you meter it, right? But there's a lot more on the engineering side to look at. Okay, so after that example, then we move to the reporting to the state. So each year we do... Oh, yes, sir.
In our material?
This diagram?
Yeah.
No.
I'd like
If
to
you'd
have a
like a copy,
of
I can
that,
send one.
please.
Or could you send a copy of the PowerPoint to us?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Will do. Okay, this is the last slide. So reporting, we do file an annual withdrawal and use report every year. You heard one about, we hear it every year. We share that with the council as a whole. And once again, just recapping, it was 38.3 for permanently recharged associated with a certain permit number. So this is our permit number. That's how I know the difference. You can see there's two different numbers. This is the number down here that if we put water down that's not permanent recharge, that's the account we accrue long-term storage credits in. This account number is the one that's permanent recharge. And so this is where I'm telling them at 38.3 acre feet is what we need you to identify in our records for permanent recharge. This water, this water in particular went into the long-term storage account. This had to be recovered the same year because it can't be permanently recharged. So that's the wrap up of permanent recharge. And then the question becomes, what if anything's added to your standing memo of pumping versus recharge? And I'll be fully clear that I'm a little bit hesitant because those numbers are provisional through the year, in my opinion. Still, we work on those numbers. And then at the end of the year is when I can dig into them and check them to say, okay, this is what's happened. And why I say that too is that just because we're delivering it to the facility, I don't have a final number because we have to take off evaporation losses first. So I don't know.
I'm not sure we're totally interested in what down to a gnat's rear end the number is, the real number.
Because I'm a detailed lady.
I think we need to look at trends. Trends are what we're really interested in.
Okay.
So I think you can give us this is probably what we think is happening number, and the trend from that number is what we're interested in.
Yeah, the best available data that we're working with at the
So
time.
quarterly?
Collecting that.
Quarterly would be
twice
awesome.
a year?
Yeah, quarterly. I would like to have things transmitted to us as often as possible, and I say as possible, but often.
Gotcha. Well, let me check in-house a little bit and see if there's agreement throughout Public Works that we can do quarterly. If there's a reason why it can't be done, then of course we will come back to you and let you know if there's a reason we can't. Does that sound
Thank
fair?
you.
And then we'll have that looking.
We're interested in reality on this commission.
And I'll put provisional across it because it'll make me feel a lot better because I know there's a lot more moving parts than meets the eye when you get a PowerPoint like this. Okay. Okay, well, that's it for this topic.
We do have Howard Mechanic on the line. Would you like him to comment at this time?
Go ahead, Howard.
Go ahead, Howard. You have 3 minutes.
I share in Mr. Blair's concern about what is called permanent recharge being pumped. And there's a lot of confusion about what is permanent recharge. This is not permanent. There's a major misunderstanding that a lot of people think that this is part of our area's plan to become sustainable. Also, almost everyone believes that this water won't be pumped in the future. Both beliefs are incorrect. First, there is no plan for sustainable water supply in our AMA. And second, unless there are major changes in the law, this water will be pumped in the future by either Prescott or others in the AMA. And let me explain why. We have an overdraft about 13,000 acre feet per year. The water will be drained out of our aquifer. Now let's assume that Prescott gets from 30 acre feet to 1,000 acre feet in what you call permanent recharge. And let's say you do that for 100 years. That'll provide 100,000 acre feet additional in the ground, which would allow our AMA to pump for an additional 8 years. But that water will be pumped. All it will do is extend the time it will take to drain our aquifer. So what we need to do is have a plan to reach safe yield. The city of Prescott cannot do that. The city of Prescott should provide leadership and invite all the parties in the AMA to develop a plan to reach safe yield. There has been no interest in the past, so let's either say there's no interest in the future or let's do something about it. But I've brought this up on many occasions over the years. The mayor promised to get the parties together to develop a plan to reach safe yield. That never happened. So if Prescott wants to provide the leadership, this is a time to do it. Water is a valuable commodity. I don't think the water users in Prescott should unilaterally pay to put water in the ground anymore. Water that will be used for the purpose of not reaching safe yield, but for the purpose of maybe extending the time to drain the aquifer. And that cost, if we do want to recharge over the period of many years in the future, I would support that as a part of a plan to reach safe yield. And if that cost is shared by all the users in the AMA, not just the users in Prescott.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Thanks, Howard.
Okay, it sounds like we don't have any other questions from the
Nobody
outside.
else.
Okay. So,
Go ahead, sir. That was my dad.
Referencing your concerns, and I think they're legitimate, about as we get more and more trees stressed, and whether they make them susceptible to a bark beetle attack, etc. And as residents start to be concerned about the trees in their yard, and they have a tendency to then use potable water to try to compensate and save them. And in many times they're watering inappropriately. Mm-hmm. They're putting water at the very base of a tree that has mostly a fibrous root system, or they don't water deeply enough to get the tap roots to be able to really absorb that. And so consequently, you've wasted a lot of water. Maybe we need to advocate for a public service announcement about how to appropriately water your trees during these periods of long-term drought, mm-hmm. so that people aren't just wasting the water thinking they're doing something good and it's just a waste.
I think that's an excellent idea. I mean, to put soaker hose out on the drip lines and leave them on for 24 hours and alternate days or whatever the case may be. How do we go about doing that, or do we need to think about that, Gwen? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to advocate more outdoor irrigation, but if people are going to do it anyway,
right,
then they ought to do it at least in a manner that's going to be beneficial instead of waste it.
All right. Okay, Gwen,
and we can reinvigorate. We've had programs on the conservation side related to those things, handouts, diagrams, and then partnerships. So it's not that we can't do it. It's just, when the city was going to engage that. So that was brought up a couple months ago.
It might be just worthwhile to address that and how to do it. and put it back into the water bill again? Okay. Very good.
Do we, okay, permanent recharge. You ready to move to your next topic?
I am. Topic
Okay.
D, focus topic is discussion of order number 86-401501 or period dot 0001 modification presentation.
And
over on that one, Blair.
there's a lot of numbers in that. Let me shut things down. And I also wanted to ask, we were going to have a general announcement section on this agenda, and that didn't happen. Would you be willing to entertain some general announcements after this presentation? Okay, thanks.
My time is your time.
We will use our time carefully for everyone. Get a new PowerPoint started. Okay, briefly, Mr. Herb Dishlip is nobody new to this group, I don't think, but it's important to remind you how active he's been with the city over the years on so many different fronts. And so back as far as 2004 and probably even earlier, but we'll start with 2004. He was assisting the city on the technical aspects of importing water from the Big Chino subbasin. He's worked with the city in preparing and getting through, instrumental in kind of being that central point for the city for our decision and order of assured water supply applications, both the 2005 and the 2009 most recently. He is a registered professional civil engineer. He's worked at the Bureau of Reclamation. He's worked at the Department of Water Resources, both, in high-level positions. And once again, I just feel we're so fortunate to have this institutional knowledge that continues to carry us for quite a while.
That brings me to a point. Hate to interrupt you, but
Anytime.
because we're such an intimate group, it'd probably be very worthwhile to ask everybody, if they don't mind, in the audience, tell us who you are, so we as a commission or board understand who's with us today.
You want him to come to the mic?
No, they can do it out there.
Shout out?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Go ahead, George. Okay. And that's the point I was trying to make. We have wonderful people here, and I want the people that are listening to this understand who they are. Go ahead. Gwen? Young lady? Okay.
John Pally, City Attorney, and I'm going to wait till announcements, but I'll introduce Dana Walsh, who's our new Assistant City Attorney.
Oh,
Starting today.
good for you.
A week late due to COVID.
And I understand she has some water experience.
I'm happy to give that now. Let me just go to Mike. Make it easy. So Dana Walsh is starting today, and Dana comes to us from the Southern Nevada Water Authority, where she's done water law procurement, public works stuff, and then prior to that, the Las Vegas Valley Water District. The difference is a wholesaler and a retailer. So bringing good water law or water background to us. She'll still have to get up to speed on sort of the Arizona nuances versus Nevada, but she's admitted to the Arizona bar. And will be sort of taking on over time much of the city's water law work, as well as public works and public works procurement, contracting, things like that.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
I should add I was born and raised in Prescott, but I haven't lived here for about 25 years. So
Are you a Badger?
I am.
Go Badgers. All right. And then we have Leslie Glazer up here, and she does a great job. So I think at all our meetings, I'd like to do that because I think it's important. Herb's been with the city for a long time, and he deserves the recognition and be able to have people know who's here talking to us. So thank you for doing that, folks. Go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, so just to do a quick refresh, now that we, we all know each other and we know Herb for quite a while too, but we need to refresh on that. The city is actively working on its application for the modification of its decision order, which was a requirement. We had decided that this would be a topic that we'd bring back to you every other month so you could see the progress that was happening and the things that were being discussed so that it wouldn't become a surprise at the very end or confusing. Knowing your definitions are very important in this so that we lump things in the right way. We speak to each other with common terms so we don't get confused and, potentially aggravated with each other sometimes because it's happened. I've seen this in my lifetime. So we wanted to bring this topic to you as demand estimates. So recall you did have your first presentation in February, I believe it was, and that's where we gave you an overview of what we were doing and how we were going to get it done. And then we brought back the next piece was physical availability. And then now we're looking at the demand side, the demand equations, the planning that we have to do for this application. So I'd like to invite Herb up, and he's going to walk through the whole thing with you. And then we can do questions along the way or at the end. Or both.
Okay, how do you, this one just moves it? Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be out of my house and be somewhere where you can see people face to face instead of on a TV screen. Although all these other people, hello, who are watching. So what I want to talk about today is a part of the work that's going on for the modification of the assured water supply. And you're familiar with the assured water supply. It is not the city's water plan, but it's a big piece of the city's water plan because it captures, because of the active management area, what's allowed for use of water and how it can be used in the future and how the city can grow. And I just want to say I've been working on this kind of stuff for a long time. And if there's anything that's more true, it's the phrase you have in the back there, the dynamic community. That there's so much dynamic things happening in Prescott and Prescott service area that it's really important to keep on top of it, to monitor what's going on, to look for changes, to be aware of where changes are occurring, and then to be able to both look at what's happened and then use what's happened to project where we're going. And the city's done a really good job of preparing for that. And what we'll talk about today, in terms of demand estimates, it's a part of the equation. It's called assured water supply. So most of the effort in this is to look at supplies, what's available. What the Department of Water Resources, who administers this program, both under the statute and the rules, is looking for is, well, how much water do you think you're going to need beyond what you're currently using? And then compare it to the supply. And he wants to make sure you have more supply than you have demand. And that's really what the equation is. That's what this study is about. And when we look at demand estimates, they are today, this is a preliminary study. We haven't gone through legal review to make sure that the numbers I'm going to show you today comport with their interpretation of the statutes. And things are subject to a little bit of change if we make some adjustments on assumptions. But it's pretty close. I think what I'm going to show you today is pretty close. And it is a dynamic situation. So what the Department of Water Resources is looking for in their application, they ask lots of questions, several pages of questions. But when it comes to demand, the bottom line is to fill out this table B. And this table B looks at projecting into the future, how much water are you using, how much do you think you're going to be using over a period of time. They have a standard of 10 years. We're going to request twice that much. We're going to request that we look at 20 years. And we're going to ask that our designation be at least for 20 years before it's subject to another review. And we think that that's very
Excuse me,
just.
Gary, could I ask a question? Does that mean that each year of those 20 years we prove that we have a 100-year water supply?
No, once you're designated, you're designated for a volume of water that you're allowed. And you have to file an annual report, which Leslie has showed you the annual reports before. Those annual reports have a section on assured water supply. and they're asking, well, what did you do in this year? And how much water did you use, especially groundwater? Groundwater is the key component here. How much groundwater did you use? And if at any point in time we're exceeding the allowance that's been given through this designation and order, they would terminate the assured water supply.
Okay.
But you aren't required to prove it every year. You're just required to monitor and report progress.
Okay, well, the problem with that is that, when we talk about 100-year assured water supply, people think we only have and can only approve that we have 100 years of water. And then the taps go off.
Well, the 100-year component, just as a way background, was a substitute for a long, long time. I was there when they did it. They say, well, how long can you prove? Generally, in most of the United States, you have to do a 50-year water plan. When they did the groundwater code, they said, well, we need more than that. So let's do 100 years. 100 years is a long, long time. And so they picked a number, and it was an arbitrary number. But then they looked at, in active management areas, you had to be a water supply that was consistent with the management goal. And the management goal in 3 of the 4 or 5 active management areas was safe yield. So in order to be in compliance with safe yield, really you need a perpetual water supply, not a 100-year water supply. You need to keep proving if you're designated. There's another approach, which is you use certificates of assured water supply, which is what Chino Valley does, what Prescott Valley does. And you have to prove a physical and legal availability for 100 years. And that's just the statutory requirement. I think the burden's greater on Prescott where they've chosen to be designated, because you have to continuously, it's subject to review, and it's subject to this notion of perpetual 100-year supply. The idea, and we'll talk about it here in a few minutes when we talk about the definitions. Before you can add customers, you have to take care of your existing customers. So if at any point in time it appears that you can't take care of your existing customers, the designation ends and you have to stop adding new growth. And that's why this study and that's why this whole approach is really important for most cities. Most cities have chosen to go the designation route. One, it streamlines completely development. Developers don't have to go through all this hydrology studies and working with the department, but it also puts the city in control of how the growth occurs, because the city, as the designated provider, is the one who plans the water supply, allocates the water supply, monitors the water supply, and it really puts the city in control of their own future. And that's why being designated is highly recommended, but it's not required. And so the city's chosen to do this. And it's chosen to do this for a long period of time. And now it's time to re-up, and we're choosing to do it again. And so it's a really important part of how the city grows and develops, is how you get this assured water supply. It's not the complete water plan. I mean, infrastructure is a very important part of water planning. Do you have enough pipes? Do you have enough wells? Do you have enough things to support people? That's a big part of water planning, too, of a city. But the water resources component, and especially the structure created by state law, really provides the framework for water management planning in the city. And the cities had gone into this wholeheartedly. We just talked about recharge. We talked about wells and recovery. It's all really related to how the city has done this designation in the past. And what happens is when you make a designation, you make a promise. You're saying, I'm promising to do the things that I'm pledging. And that's really important. Then you have to follow through. So when the city promised to recharge surface water from Watson and Willow Lake, it's really important that you followed through and you did it, because that's part of the monitoring and compliance that the state's looking for, that if you're going to be designated, you got to do what you said you were going to do, or you got to modify your application. So let me move on here. So the statutory language, or more the rule language, relates to how the Department of Water Resources looks at demand. And in the past, we've looked at demand before the council using numbers in the past. We've had to modify how we look at it a little bit to relate back to the way the department looks at it. The first one is current demand. And the current demand is really, what did you use last year? And last year being 2020. And we've reported to you, and I'll show you again those numbers, what that water is. It's important to note that the designation that we currently have and the future designation is not just the potable water, but also the non-potable water, the water we deliver to the golf courses and to the sand and gravel mine. And so it's a combination of all water that's delivered. Committed is a really important concept. The committed demand is the estimate of recorded but unbuilt lots. So we had to do a survey and an inventory of what's been platted in recorded subdivisions, what lots have demand on them, where are there people living, and where are there vacant lots. And we've done that as part of this study. In 2009, however, the department went, sure, Steve.
With that comment, when you're looking at platted lots, do you look at the general plan and look what may be annexed into the community?
We do that on the next one, the projected demand.
Okay.
Committed demand is only what went to final plat, not even preliminary plat. Because what the department believes is, as you do a certificate, it's only when you get a final plat that certificate comes in play. Same thing in a designation. Until there's a final plat, the commitment isn't to the home buyer that you have a 100-year water supply. But once there is a final plat, the city's designated and it's on the plat that the water service will be provided consistent with the assured water supply. So they're really looking at final plats. But the one exception to that is, and this is why I say it's dynamic, I just discovered this a couple of days ago, is that the department in 2009 added to that the CVID commitment when the water rights were purchased. The city made a commitment if certain landowners wanted to get service from the city would set aside an amount of water for future development. Those lots, some of them are platted, but most of them are not platted. So most of them are kind of amorphous what might be the demand on them. But the department considered that as a committed demand, and it certainly is a commitment. The city signed a contract to provide service. Whether or not it ever comes into play depends on what happens in the future. Now, the third category they look at is projected demand. And that's the demand at build-out of lots that will be recorded. So these are things that are proposed but not recorded yet. And other customers expected to be added during the term of the designation. And we've looked at it in this study two ways. We've looked at it because the department won't designate you forever. We've looked at it for a 20-year period, but we try to look at it beyond to what might be the ultimate demand the city might have under current conditions. And in this case, we do look at master plans and at proposed annexations, but only to a limit of what we really know about. So what's the tool we've been using? The tool is, we've discussed this before, we call it the Water Resource Management Model. What's key about this model is it keeps track of data, and it's really important. Every year we get a really good data set from the utilities billing. So we know every customer through the utility billing how much water they used by month. We have to summarize that down to how much they use by the year. But then we add that to the database from the previous years, and we go back to about 2011 or 12, I think. We have all this data for what people have been using. But we also can see from that database the trends. Who are the new customers? What new customers came online this year? How many came online this year? What kind of customers? Were they multifamily, single family, non-residential customers? So we have an excellent database to monitor, and monitoring is one of the key things for this water resource management. It goes beyond what we're going to talk about today. It talks about supplies as well, but today I want to talk about the part of the model that deals with demand. And what we've been able to do, especially here in Prescott, is a lot of people develop demand models without really looking at the customer base. They look at population and how many people do we serve, how many people do we think we're going to serve 5 years from now. What we've been able to do here is really personalize and localize. Using geographic information systems, we actually plot where those customers are. And so we have a good idea. And as far as growth goes, we also plot where we think the growth areas are going to be. One of the additional models that we haven't been able to use yet, and it's a really key model, is a hydrogeologic model. So what we talk about in the water resources management model is a little bit of paper water. It's what's potentially out there for demand, what's potentially for supply. The other side of this, and it's a big requirement of this assured water supply, is to look at the physical availability. And that's some of the questions, Councilman Shishka, you were asking about water levels and drawdowns and across the AMA. That Matrix model, Matrix is a company, they're going to take the Department of Water Resources geologic model and adapt it for Prescott. And when we have that tool in the toolbox, a lot of the questions you were asking about water level declines, projections of declines, what the aquifer declines would be in the airport area versus the Chino Valley, it'll all fall out of this Matrix study. So it's a very key, important thing, and I'm making a plug for it because I think that was kind of a missing piece that we didn't have good knowledge. The department's done a model for many years, but I don't think it really captured what was going on with the city very well, because the city, again, is dynamic on that part. So when we look at the current demand, here's a photograph of what the model output is. So here's like downtown Prescott, here's the Indian Reservation, and here's Chino Valley. And these dots each represent a water account. And so we've got about 22 to 24,000 dots on this map. And that's how many people we keep track of every year. From the utility billing records for 2020, we're looking again to satisfy the department's requirement for current demand. We'll break this down into potable and non-potable. The potable deliveries were made to 24,660 accounts, but 88.5% of those accounts are single family. So it's dominant single family. Only 3.2% of the accounts are multifamily. Now, multifamily might have 5 or 6 units per account or 10 units per account. And then the non-residential, the city actually keeps track of this in much more detail. They keep track of non-residential by commercial, construction, other, government. For our purposes, we just lumped it together and call it non-residential, about 8.4%. But look at the difference between the percent of accounts and the percent of water use. That 88.5% uses 57% of the water that we deliver. That 3% delivers 9% of the volume of water, and non-residential represents 33%. So for each account, we get a much higher unit account. So for 2020, the single-family account worked out to be 0.18 acre foot per single-family account, 0.84 per multifamily account, and 1.1 acre feet per non-residential account. And that's a big range in the non-residential. You have some customers who use 50 or 60 acre feet for large turf facilities or the hospitals, things like that. But on average, we put it all together, it's 1.1 acre feet, which is still 5 times greater than a single family house. And then we have on top of that, and really important for the department, they don't really care about what you deliver. They care about what you withdrew. And we have to add the lost and unaccounted for water. And again, this is from the annual report, 686 acre feet of lost or unaccounted for. And it's not all lost. It's just some of it's unmetered delivery, some of it's water hydrant flushing. There's a lot of them are legitimate uses. They're just unmetered. And then some of it is lost through distribution system.
Water line.
Some of the facts about the current demands. We have regional water provider service in Prescott. 88% of the water we showed of those 24,000 dots are located within the city limits. About 7.4% of the dots are located in Yavapai County, unincorporated, not in the city limits, but part of the city service area. 2.6% are in the town of Chino Valley, and 1.7 are on the Indian Reservation. So most of what we serve is in the city limits, but we clearly are a regional water provider, not just a city water provider. Most of the water is made to recorded subdivisions, about 75% to subdivisions, about 23% to lots. Well, you know, everything wasn't a subdivision in the city. A lot of it's just developed lots. And then 1.7 on the reservation. If you look at, this is kind of interesting. This is not the total water supply delivered, but the utility billing. It goes up and down. And so it's not a constant trend upward. The trend line kind of shows you that as we grow and we add more customers, it's mostly growth as a result of adding customers. It's not necessarily a result of people using more water per person. But you can have dips. And I'm sure that most of this dipping is weather related. That people use more water when it's hotter and drier and less water when it isn't. So here we have more customers in 2016 clearly than we had in 2011, and we used less water. So there's a lot of variables. When you're doing a plan, though, you want to look at trends, and you want to look at the general trend we're going through. So we took kind of a jump here to 6,600 acre feet delivered. The trend would have been about 6,400 acre feet, so we're pretty close to following the trend line. So the current demand also includes deliveries through the non-potable or the reclaim system. And those are primarily our golf courses, 900 acre feet to Antelope Hills. And I note, for some reason, this is the highest delivery we had records for since 2010 to Antelope Hills. So I kind of see that as an upper limit over what they might ever ask for. Hassayampa, Prescott Lakes, Hanson uses about 121 acre feet other for a total of 1,680. So that's what we deliver. And then we estimate the losses at 138. Put it all together for what's our current demand. Our current demand for potable, when you add the deliveries plus losses, 7,500 acre feet. Non-potable, 16 plus 138, 1,800 acre feet. So when we talk about our current demand, we can't just talk about what we deliver potable. We have to talk about everything we deliver, and that's 9,300. And sometimes people get confused. Well, we have 16,000 and we only deliver 7,000. Well, we actually deliver 9,000. And that's an important distinction. And as far as DWR is concerned, that's what they're looking at. They're not looking at the potable, they're looking at the total. So then we look at the committed. Where are these vacant lots? And they're spread out everywhere. When you look at, if you add the CVID demand, that concentrates a lot of vacant lot type use up in Chino Valley. We have vacant lots in some of the recorded subdivisions in the north part of the valley where we've had a lot of growth. Some of those lots have been platted but not yet built on. And then what we see throughout the community is just a lot of long-term vacant lots and some short-term vacant lots, but a lot of long-term vacant lots where it's very interesting. You don't see lots owned by the developer. People bought them a long time ago sometimes, and they just haven't gotten in and developed them for one reason or another. So when you put it all together,
So those lots will be considered committed demand.
They are committed. Yeah. And so, and they really are committed. The city promised that they would provide water service.
If they find some way to stick a home in there,
yes,
then we have to commit to delivering water to it.
And you've already committed to it. Basically, legally, you've already committed to it. So when we look at the numbers now for all those dots, the first category we looked at was, well, we have new customers who came on in 2020, and they only used water for 1 or 2 or 3 months. We also have customers who were dormant in 2020. They may have used water in 2015, but for whatever reason, they didn't use any water in 2020. But you have to take that into account, that if you had a lot that had a house on it, or even a irrigation demand, it could have been somebody set up an irrigation account and they stopped using that account, but they might start it up again. And when we calculated that, that's 207 acre feet that didn't show up in that 6,800 acre feet. So we have to call that a commitment. The subdivisions in the city, 711 recorded subdivisions in your service area, approximately 26,550 lots associated with those 711 subdivisions. Out of that, we found there are 3,890 undeveloped lots. So when we show all those dots for lots, that's 3,890. That's a lot of lots. So that's part of our commitment. When we break it down that a little bit further, when you look at the zoning or the subdivision conditions, some of those are actually non-residential components. 3,750 lots residential, 320 lots for non-residential. And so some of the subdivisions are actually commercial subdivisions. Put numbers to it. We have the vacant and partial 207. You take those vacant lots for residential, through 679 acre feet would be the estimate based on the model output. Non-residential, about 300. If we add in 8% system losses, which is our standard for public works, we have a total committed demand of 1,289 acre feet for all those dots of vacant lots. So that's what we estimate when we look at this committed demand, and that's what we'll probably show that to DWR just as that number, but we could vary it a little bit. Well, one of the variables we have is when we look at multifamily projections, we're using almost entirely zoning because they're not in subdivisions for the most part. They're on plots of land. And when you look at the zoning, then you don't know, is this going to be a big apartment complex or is it going to be a triplex? And so you could have 100 units or you could have 3. And we want to refine that a little bit to get a better idea. If we're looking at multifamily represents about 3%. It's probably going to be 3% forever. There's going to be new multifamily. So we might tinker a little bit with this number. When you look at the non-potable component, we estimated that as the sum of the highest individual use. So we looked at a period from 2010 to 2020, each of those customers, what was their highest use? And that gives you a kind of a factor of safety, you might want to call it, or a cushion, that they might on any individual year ask for that much water again. And if they did that simultaneously, we would need another 115 acre feet that we would call committed. If you add to that the system losses to support that, we would estimate about 125 acre feet of commitment to those same customers. So that's not adding any new customers. So that's not if you want to expand the service for direct potable, you want to build another golf course, you want to build something else, that would be a different category. But this is for your existing customers. What might they ask for if they wanted to exceed what they used in 2020? The CVID agreement is much more difficult to estimate, although it's on paper 0.25 acre foot per acre. Residential demand would be estimated, again, mostly on zoning, 445 acre feet. Non-residential demand at 53, and that's again based on zoning. System losses of 43 for a total of 542. Now, one interesting component to CVID, some of the land in the CVID agreement has been subdivided. There's 4, 5, or 6 subdivisions up there. That counted in the other category of projected. It doesn't count as CVID anymore. It is recorded lots. So you put that all together. Potable estimated committed demand 1,289, non-potable 125, CVID 542. We're at about another 2,000 acre feet total of projected committed demand. So that's a number that DWR is going to look for, about 2,000 acre feet. Then we looked at projected demand, and projected demand are people who are not yet platted. but it includes lots within the city and county that probably will be getting service someday, but they're not part of a subdivision. They might be lot splits. They might be just parcels. There's a lot of parcels that are already parceled up that don't have water service yet. We have water that will be served to the Yavapai Prescott tribe if they expand service. We have intergovernmental agreements, Town of Chino Valley Commercial Corridor, Stringfield Ranch, Dwid. We have preliminary plats that have been presented to the council or to at least the city development. We've looked at those. We have pre-annexation agreements, including a very large pre-annexation agreement or an easement agreement with Deepwell Ranch. And Deepwell Ranch, when I talk about things by being dynamic, when we added in the demand potential for Deepwell Ranch, it had a big impact on how we've looked at the demand numbers compared to prior studies. And we have some water service agreements to provide water too. We looked at thousands of potential lots are being proposed and being evaluated. This would be mostly things like Granite Dells, Yavapai Hills Unit 9, Hidden Hills. Those are preliminary plats. Big development potential in master plan communities. We have state land parcels which could be developed. They're really slow to be developed, but quite a few sections of land in the city limits of state land. And then while we focused a lot on single family, because a lot of these plats that we're showing and preliminary plats are done to sell single family houses, we know that there's a balance in the community, that you may not know where the grocery store is going to be or where the strip mall is going to be, but you know there's going to be one, because as you grow houses, you're going to grow related demand. And so we've tried to add that into the projection as well. When we look here at where the projected demand is, you can see we're projecting very large demand in the north part of the city. It so happens that most of this demand is also Prop 400 land, which has an effect later on the supply side. We also see demand projections filling in a lot of the subdivisions and preliminary plats. Trying to estimate these numbers. And as you get away from things like plats, you're much closer to guessing. I'm not going to say we guessed, but your ability to judge exactly what might happen out there is subject to a lot of change. And we've seen that change too. We've seen people come in with master plans, and then when they go to final plat, it's a lot fewer lots on the final plat than there were in the master plan. But our estimate is, when we looked at all those dots, over 12,000 single-family residents. Multifamily, based on zoning, primarily 672 new accounts. Non-residential, 451 accounts. And you put that all together in water, about 3,400 acre-feet of water projected demand above what we've already made a commitment for. Now, none of this is committed. This is all people who have to still come to council, get a final plat approval. But they're out there and they're in your service area or potential service area. And you could look at that in line with the Department of Water Resources definition and say, what might likely be coming on that isn't platted? So when you put everything together, current, committed, and potential, you get a service area that looks like that. Again, spread out, but highly concentrated, a lot of growth and development in the north side where these big master plans are, and then growth in the Chino Valley through the CVID agreement. When you put the potential demand together for build out, and this is not a requirement for Department of Water Resources. This is more looking for a planning study for the city. We take that 7,500 acre feet of current demand, 1,800 acre feet of committed, projected 3,400. We're at 12,000. Non-potable, the 1,819, that includes the losses on top of the 1,600. We're at 1,900. Our total potential demand is, we've estimated at 14,373, which is not a precise number, about. But that's what the numbers add up to. And if you compare it just with the prior decision and order, they declared we had 16,000 acre feet available based on assumptions at that time. So we're still in a range. This is a higher number than I've shown before. And most of that is related to Granite Dells and Deepwell Ranch and AED potential developments. But we're still in a range, but that's their potential. DWR doesn't really care about that number. They want to know a 10-year or 20-year projection. So we looked at, well, how do you come up with that? And we looked, starting with, are there trends we've been looking at for growth and development since we've been keeping these records? And these are a number of accounts added per year. Rather than people, we've been looking at accounts. That's how we've been keeping track of everything, not by person, but by unit or by meter. And so we've added, starting in 2011, over the base, we added less than 200 accounts. We've moved up here to where we're over 400 accounts as growth and development and the economy responded. And so we've seen a major trend line come along in terms of new accounts. When we look at this 20-year projection, we know that growth is dependent on market conditions, competition. There will be subdivisions in Prescott Valley. There'll be subdivisions in Chino Valley. We looked at that and come up with that kind of factoring in. The growth rates reflect a more sustained growth pattern than a downturn economy pattern, we think. There are limitations based on what community development has told us, may be based more on construction labor availability. There'll be more lots available than their ability to put a house on them. And that was an advisory from community development that you can't just go unlimited on what you think there might be for potential yearly demand. There's a cap on it based on how many construction workers you can draw. They have suggested community development that we look to the future at about 450 single-family units per year. Now, that's a trend. It'll be up and down. But based on that prior number, the trend is certainly headed there, of adding about 450. And again, when you add potential, you've got home builders, you've got lots, you've got infrastructure, you've got a good economy. 450 is a number that we think we can support to DWR. When you look at that, then we would add a component of 3% for multifamily, 9% for non-residential. Out of that 450, we've noticed that on that trend line, about 20% of the new development, new accounts were actually infill in older subdivisions. So we've continued that onto the projection. But clearly we show most of the growth and development are going to likely occur in new subdivisions where home builders are available, not on custom built lots, and that will dominate the 20-year projection. So when we look at potable demand only, we're starting at about 7,000 acre feet at 450 lots plus that related use. We're going to project ourselves up to a little over 10,000 acre feet of potable demand over that 20-year period. We look at the incremental demand over the projection period. Some of that's going to be infill lots, and some of it's going to be lots that haven't been plotted yet. And we have to make a little bit of a guess. Clearly, at the beginning here, it's all going to be lots that are already platted. It takes time to plat lots and get the infrastructure built. But it's happening fairly quickly, is what community development's telling us. That new subdivisions that are coming online very rapidly, and they add 100 or 200 or 300 lots per year as availability. And what we would project then is that 20% to start to take place out of the lots, and the most of the growth and development over the 20-year period at the end is going to be a result of developments kind of on the north side in those big master plans. When you put the things together, the non-potable, which we project not much change on, the potable, where we're going to grow as we grow as a city, we're going to reach up here at the 12,000 acre foot lot mark over that period of 20 years. That compares with the 14,000 number I said is total build out. The number would be 12,040 on this chart. And this is where we started the presentation with table B, not filled out. And this is how we would project to fill it out with this committed demand, current demand, committed demand, projected demand, total demand. We have to still come back in and fill the population number. It would be very helpful if we had census data, current census data from 2020. If we don't have census data, we'll have to use an estimate of people per lot to get there. And this is kind of where our bottom lines are going to be to DWR.
Herb, I have a question for
Sure.
you. As new developments become more and more of a part of our entire population, do you see that 0.18 going down? Single family.
Personally, I do. The 0.17 is closer to the long-term average. 2020 happened to be 0.18. When we look at the whole period, 0.17 was the number. And it varied with subdivision. Some of them are considerably less than that. What we're seeing, just based on my looking at some of these plats and master plans, is more density. We're seeing more density, smaller lots. So you're going to see probably a little less outdoor landscaping, even though there's very little outdoor landscaping now. When you have these densities, you're going to see plots of landscaping. And you'll have all water-using efficient fixtures. Everything will be new, so things won't have decayed over time. You know, you're not having a 30-year-old toilet in anybody's house. So I think that there will be a trend, but at the 1.17 number, I think that's a pretty conservative number. That's only 110
Howard
gallons per
capsule
person.
connection.
So it's a pretty conservative number now.
Okay. Couple
And
things. returning
I
your
do
call,
think that new subdivisions
like,
may
someone
bring
made
the
a
average
mistake on
down
the order.
a little
If
bit.
you don't
So.
order separated, but it was on the order.
And multifamily at
We
0.08. You see that
I talked to
trending downward. as
Billy
things
about
get-
that after she ordered,
I think that the
and I told her we had a shortage
multifamily
on the
will be
separated.
dependent on what kind of
and we could
multifamily we
send
see.
Some,
I saw last year we had a
and
couple
send
of
some this week.
significant apartment complexes.
she
come
said,
in.
go ahead and send some of the
We
separated.
added not
so
just
maybe
a
she was
duplex or a
confused.
triplex, which are small multifamily, but bigger units.
Right.
And with those, I think
All
the
right.
number's
Well, I
pretty
understand
lower.
that, except that was on
They
the
tend to have a
first,
common area and a pool, maybe, but each house or each apartment.
That
is
was
gonna
part of the
use less
shipment.
water
I don't
than
know
a
if I can
triplex.
recall one box on
I
that
do think that
shipment,
number
for
would come down.
UPS.
If we could get a better feel
We're
for
gonna have to return
in the
it.
master plans, there's quite a bit of multifamily
But in
proposal.
any case,
What they have in mind.
we'll ship the rest of the
Do
separated.
they have something in mind like you would see in Phoenix, where a lot of apartment complexes have gone in with 3 stories and maybe 20 units per block and about 10 blocks? Is that what they got in mind, or do they have in mind townhouses with 1 or 2 units? It's hard to know where multifamily's going.
So Herb, in this study, do you think you'll eventually get to a point where you'll kind of add in market conditions?
If community development could give us that input, that's not something the water people really know much about. But if community development could say, look, we can do better than 450 because the market's good and we've drawn more construction workers, we could up the number. And that would be somewhat the dynamic part of what we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I've just adopted numbers that George gave me pretty much of what his best opinion is. And I trust his opinion. So,
Well, I know that the market, to an extent, and projected market controls how this development happens and how many, we actually lost population in the recession. And so how that factors into that 20-year situation would be interesting.
It
also.
does. And the number I showed you of 207 acre feet of lots that have buildings on them with no people in them, that's part of that is vacancies. And generally all cities have vacancies. They do. That's just the way it is. You've got some transition going on. When you're doing water planning, you can plan as if there were vacancies, or you can be more conservative and plan as if there were no vacancies. If you plan as if there are no vacancies, then you're planning for kind of the worst case, which is factor of safety. I always advocate for factor of safety. Be more cautious when you're planning than less cautious. You never know what's going to happen in any given year. The drought conditions could be so bad that people really spike up in any given year. And so you want to be very cautious in how you approach it. So the way we've done this study, by adding that 207 acre feet in as committed demand, we're basically saying no vacancies. When we do projection, it's at build out, which is the requirement, at build out. Committed demand at build out. So we're looking at a city. It's not going to be the real city. It's going to be the ultimate build out, but there will be vacancies, no question. And that happens when you mentioned you lost population. Okay, you lost a little population, but you didn't lose any lots.
Right.
And you didn't lose any houses that were already there. You just lost the people. So,
Herb, I have a couple of questions.
sure.
The worm that you've developed, do you own that, or does the city
No,
own
the
it?
city owns that.
City owns it. And how well is the database protected? I mean, if we're going to be projecting for 20 years to ADWR and being able to ask for and hopefully be granted a DNO that's going to last for 20 years, that database is going to be extremely important to protect and make sure that it isn't corrupted or anything else.
You know, the data is almost entirely data from the city already.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the utility billing, that's not commonly out to the public, but it's the city owns they keep track of the records of everything. That's the basis of this model, is the utility billing records. So I don't know how well that's protected. It's pretty hard to get a hold of. I know that, even for me when I asked for it. The overall model is proprietary to the city. They own it. But the information that's provided to DWR is public information. Anybody can look at it. The annual reports the city files is public information. So a lot of it is public, and it's good that it's public. How you look at the studies and the model studies, that's really owned by the city. The matrix model that they produce will be based on the DWR model. So they're taking the DWR hydrologic model and inputting it to meet Prescott's study. That pretty much, if we present that to the city or to the DWR, that'll be public information. The model itself will be owned by the city. So I don't know how I answered your question, but I'm not sure. It's probably not that secure.
We're going to be asking for ADWR for a 20-year DNO, and that has to be based upon our ability to annually report what our projections are. And as long as we're within a reasonable range of our projections, we can anticipate that the authority will be continued to be granted unless we, for some reason, are way, way off.
I'll let Leslie add to this, but I was at DWR when we made the rules. And there was some limit of, well, what are you going to enforce? And the bottom line on enforcement is, did you use more groundwater in your groundwater allowance? So if you use more water than you projected, but it was surface water, or if you use more water than you projected and it was recovered effluent credits, that did not trigger losing your designation. But if you used more groundwater than you were allowed to, that was a potential trigger, because that was the key component. But go ahead, Leslie.
I think I might be one question back, actually. So how is the worm protected?
Mm-hmm.
It's treated like the city's water and wastewater model. It doesn't go out to the public for use. We wrote up procedures on how we would like things to be handled. So, pretty close, because it's not under development. I think we're in that and we're beyond testing. We're applying it now to this project. And so it's not something that's going to be out. So it has GIS support. It has in-house other department support. So we don't have, we have no plans to have it being a public use at this time. We take clips out of it like you have seen today, but it's not a model that gets handed over to the public because it does have private information in it, billing information.
Yeah, it's just
locations.
the technology for applications and programs have advanced so rapidly. Even when I was working with some current hospital systems, they were still relying on DOS-based programs. And there were so few people that were available anywhere in the country that could work on a DOS-based. All of a sudden, their costs for maintaining that system went through the roof because the few technicians that could work on DOS were demanding higher and higher hourly rates.
Yeah,
And, you know, that whole technology process, I think, accelerates even faster.
right. So Herb is using current Excels and GIS, and there's GIS support here in-house, of course. And then it is, you know, I've been watching as well. I'm like, what does this move to next? Because there'll be a point at some point where we lift what we have now and put it into something more modern when that time comes. If it holds up as is, great. And we do. Protections against corruption, that's been paramount in our mind, and how we store this so that we don't have a drift on this model where we're just like, well, when did that happen? You know, when did we lose that portion of the model or something, you know, that's driving it? Because people do easily just take whatever number sometimes it gets spit out of something and they figure it's correct, but they don't do their homework and go back into it and make sure it's all operating correctly. So it's a point well taken, and it's part of what we do is making sure.
One
that
last
now.
question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned that last year we added 773 new water accounts. So that seems to be in contradiction to the 450 that you were mentioning.
Yeah, here's the chart. And for 2020, it's 440, not 700, 440.
We might have compiled numbers differently at that time. I'll have to check, but I remember that what you're saying. We have a number around 700 and looking at, you know, what's caused that increase.
Yeah. So this is, again, the utility billing numbers. So every year they add new numbers. In the 24,000, they get to 25,000. It's assigned new numbers. So I look for, compared to the previous year, how many new accounts were added, and that's this total.
So Herb, how is the matrix study going to interface with the worm?
Well, the matrix study, and why I made a pitch for it, is it's critical piece of component independent of the worm, because it tells you not just on paper what you think you've got, it gives you the physical answer. It gives you, if I recharge at the airport area and withdraw a certain percent of it, what's going to happen to water levels? If I keep pumping in the little Chino at the rates I'm pumping or increase the rates I'm pumping, what's going to happen to the water levels? It's the physicality of the supply, and that's a key component to assured supply. They didn't just want your paper number and say, okay, I've got a legal right to use this water.
Right.
So you could have a water right to Watson Lake. It's 2 or 3 times the yield of that lake, because it could be, you know, that in a really, really good year, you could get 2 or 3 times the yield. That's a water right. I have a right to it. I can't expect to serve customers based on that water right. I can only expect to serve customers on what's physically going to be available. And the matrix study gives you the feel for the physical availability of your pumping. Now, pumping is complicated because in our Arizona system, the pumping could be effluent recovery, it could be surface water recovery, it could be recharge recovery, you know, it could be, and then native groundwater. And how you do that is keep track of it through your policies and through your annual reporting. But to the groundwater aquifer, it all looks the same. There's no labels on it. It just looks like water.
Right.
And what the matrix model is going to tell us is what's happening with the water. And not just the label part of it, but what's the water going to do?
I think that that's what the public is really interested in. They want to go, yeah, you got this paper water, and it seems like you know what you're doing, but is the water physically there?
Exactly. And you know, because you can't see underground, it's a little, to me, like electricity. You can't see electricity, but the lights are on. You can't see underground either, but people who understand hydrogeology, know how to interpret things, they can visualize what the groundwater looks like. And that's what these mod flow models are called. Mod flow, they're developed by the Geologic Survey. The mod flow software, DWR takes that software, and they present an AMA-wide model. They don't just care about Prescott. They care about the whole AMA, both subbasins, everything that's going on, how much water is coming in, how much is recharged naturally that Leslie talked about. What we need to do is take that model and focus it on City of Prescott pumping, City of Prescott recharge, the locations of those. They're not spread out all over the place. They're concentrated. And have that mod flow model give us the output of, well, here's what's going to happen to the aquifer. And it's a key component to assured water supply. But to me, it's a very key component to water planning for the City of Prescott as well. So,
Can we have a copy of your presentation?
of course.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Just remember, it's preliminary, so you might see different numbers later.
Sure.
So, yeah. So
Do you have anybody on the line that has their
No,
hand?
Chairman.
Okay. Does that
Oh.
wrap it up, Herb?
Yes.
Sorry, excuse me, Leslie just raised her hand right after you asked me that.
Move it over.
Okay,
ahead.
Leslie, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I unfortunately got interrupted by a phone call from a family member during the very last part of this, but has anybody talked about the overdraft? We're already overdrafting, and as we grow, I can't see that the overdraft is not going to increase. And I'd like to know how the overdraft fits into all of this.
As I said at the very beginning, there's two sides to assured water supply, demand and supply. Overdraft is the result of lack of supply. What this focused presentation today was just on the demand side. We'll come back and give you a presentation on the supply side as we develop it. So overdraft would be caused by not having enough supply, or a supply that's it's obviously physically available, but it's drawing down the aquifer, mining the water supply. That's a component of the supply side of the study, which we haven't done yet. So
Okay.
can't answer that question until we have the other half of the equation.
Thank you. Herb.
Okay. Thank you very much. I've learned a ton
Thank
of
you,
stuff.
Leslie. Okay, Herb, I appreciate you spending your time to come up here and educate us one more time, and it's always nice to hear your knowledge.
Yeah, well, to me, it's very important that the council understand the importance of this kind of. It's the water piece. But the water piece is a big part of the city.
When is this going to be defined? I mean, when you say your numbers are your numbers. And the reason why I'm asking that is because this needs to move with you coming up here and giving a full presentation to council.
So our timeline was on the first PowerPoint that we gave you. So we're looking at going in for a pre-application in August with the state. And then we have about 2 months to make any adjustments that we need to do. So if there's a point in time that you want a full council presentation on status of this, we could do that. If you want to wait till we come back out of a pre-application and see if we're all, nodding at the table, basically.
I think that's what I'd like to see.
So we
is
can look at that. That
somewhere
would be
around-
more like November. And we would need to bring this entire package to you anyways, because we have to have approval by the council for the city manager to sign off on the application.
Does that sound okay to everybody here? Okay. And then
So-
the projections look great, Herb. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Thank you, Leslie.
Sure.
Anything else today?
Do you want to just go over quick announcements?
Sure.
Are we?
We're okay.
Okay.
Let's say, I just have a question for you. It was mentioned overdraft. Overdraft is an AMA situation, isn't it? Not necessarily a Prescott situation.
An aquifer situation. Yeah. So we're all working over the same aquifer or subbasins. So the Prescott Valley area is working over a certain aquifer area subbasin, and then Prescott and Chino Valley and parts of unincorporated are working under another one. So yeah, they look at overdraft of an aquifer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can get the last item up for you. While I'm doing that. There was discussions, and I'm not sure where they ended. I'll talk and type at the same time. As to whether you'd have a meeting next month. Was there a decision? Okay, there's a plan for a meeting. Okay, good. So that we have that one. So I want to make sure we're timing well. I'm bringing forward this item because there's a lot of discussion about it lately. It's showing up in the papers. I haven't seen it so much here in the local paper, but in the Tucson and Phoenix papers quite a bit. So we do have what's called the Kyle Center for Water Policy. They have been working for quite a while, actually, looking at Arizona into the future. So they published this report here, The Myth of Safe Yield, Pursuing the Goal of Safe Yield Isn't Saving Our Groundwater. This report's available if you'd like to look at it. There are little just blips on this one. It says, if Arizona is to prosper into the next century, our focus needs to turn to what is essential for our future, the preservation of our groundwater and our increasing fragile aquifers. So they said we're at a crossroads between success and not doing good enough. As this report explains, conservation, while necessary, is insufficient to achieve safe yield. So it's just not the one silver bullet kind of thing. And we know this from the management plans. They gave us a lot of information that says Prescott area, more overall the Prescott active management area, not just the city. These are things that you need to bring into play to have your water supply future solid. It talks about too many users are allowed to pump groundwater in perpetuity, while others are allowed to initiate new uses of groundwater. Safe yield has been subject to differing interpretations, complicating the assessment of the goal. So, seeing Councilman Shishka nod his head. Here again, when we think we're talking the same thing, but somebody has a different picture in their mind or a different definition, it tangles us up a little bit. It says achieving safe yield will not prevent the lowering of groundwater levels in all areas of an active management area or the inherent consequences of long-term groundwater decline, including land subsidence, water quality degradation, and water aquifer compaction. Legislation since 1980 has created additional challenges for the sustainability of groundwater supplies in the AMA. Too many years have passed and too much groundwater has been pumped to ignore these issues any longer. It is once again time for the legislature and all Arizonans to recognize these new strategies, or recognize that new strategies are needed to secure long-term sustainability of groundwater in AMAs. So this is, once again, it's available. We can send you the link if you'd like to see what's happening related to this item. Your connection that I want to make for you is that as one of your focus topics or forecasted items that we've put on a list is the Governor's Water Committee, as well as the management plan work groups. So this report is kind of stemming out of those things that they're struggling with right now. And so they're looking at what is Arizona overall, not just us, going to look like post-2025? What kind of management plans are we going to have in place? How are we going to address unreplenished recharge? It just goes on and on. Augmentation, things of how we're going to make this all work into the future. So I wanted you to just be aware of that so that you can look it up. You're aware of it if it comes into our local papers here.
Let's say I have a question for you, and you know, you were working down at ADWR, right?
I worked here locally at the local AMA office and in Phoenix, and all over the state, actually.
My question is, a lot of people have confusion about how the CAP relates to this area, which it really doesn't, does it?
Well, we don't have the physical supply coming in here,
Right.
but as
Well-
the reservoirs go. So if they're having challenges with having enough water supplies in the CAP reservoirs, related reservoirs, we can see here it's pretty clear our reservoirs have gone down, and those are the water supplies that we rely on. So that would be the connectivity. I mean, it's clear that we don't have
We don't
CAP
have
water
access to a
supplies coming.
physical source from CAP, though, right?
those were sold
Okay, and
off to
haven't
get
for a
Big
long
Chino
time.
water as your backup supply.
So my question is groundwater in the CAP areas that do have physical access, is groundwater just a supplement to their total water needs?
That's a big question. So let me say because of groundwater declines, an additional water supply was looked at for many years, and that brought forth the CAP supplies so they could relax their groundwater use and use these surface water renewable supplies instead. So we had to be careful in comparisons. The aquifers are much deeper. They're 3-layer aquifer systems in basins and ranges. We're in a transition zone in the Central Highlands. We don't have the depths they work with there. They are actually, it would be somewhat of a long story, but I'll see if I can relate it. They are actually looking at studies that would raise Bartlett Dam right now so that they could have more surface water supplies because they want to limit how much they have to pump from the groundwater system. So they knew, and they know now, that their groundwater systems generally aren't going to hold up as they would like them to. So as they can't use the CAP supplies, they know they're going to have to go back to their groundwater during these times. And then they're looking at how do they have even more renewable supplies until the Central Arizona project catches up. It's a big conversation. So I'll try to nutshell it.
Thank you.
Okay, last item is that locally, we have the Central Arizona Partnership, and they had a presentation last week on water rights policy and management. I recognized a few faces there. Their lead speaker was Michael J. Pierce from Gamage and Burnham, and he's also part of our DNO project. So once again, I think this is an ongoing story, water supplies. So I hope we can all bear with each other as we ride the highs and the lows of working through these challenges and then passing on to the next generation. But looking in the newspaper back in 2008, this Central Arizona Partnership was also meeting to talk about a water debate. And so they were having challenges with, how are we going to bring Big Chino in? How are we going to relax our aquifers a little bit for the long term? So onward they go. I believe CAP, meaning Central Arizona Partnership, not Central Arizona Project, locally is about 15 years old. So we'll see if we can still keep balancing economies and water and livelihood, healthy communities. Did I miss anything? Do we have any conservation? Okay. We're done.
That's it?
We're done.
Oh, I was just getting warmed up. Any other questions from the commission here or
No
committee?
comments online.
Okay, everybody, thank you again for showing up. Welcome to the city of Prescott, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next month. This meeting is adjourned.